Now, you can't disregard race in a society where it's all around and where the inequalities are so great. But, how do you tell this little kid that, hey, you're black, you're the best thing in the world, people come in all sorts of different colors, and that other kid's the one that has a problem, not you. But all of us have had to go through that.
There are teachers that teach for a living. I've always felt that Blaine taught for a life, for our life. Not necessarily his life, but he taught, shared what he get here. He packaged what he got here and brought it to us. And that is what I guess made me so impressed with what he did, because he continued to, whether he was giving a lecture in a pool room or in a classroom, it made no difference. People listened to him because they understood that he was talking not because he knew everything. Blaine, I think, believed that what they say is that it's your attitude, not your aptitude, that determines your altitude. And I think Blaine understood that. So people didn't see him as an egghead, as somebody coming down telling us what he knew. He wasn't like that at all. So it just made me, I learned, as I say, so much from him. He meant so much to me.
His association, when you're going from a person who, during the Civil Rights era, who took over the dean's office as an undergraduate student in protest of the situation at U of L at the time and nationwide, and then coming back to be the dean of that same college, that's extraordinary. And not only because it was a gift, but because I think he was an able administrator. He was certainly a good faculty member. And I think he had some affinity for staff because he was a staff member for quite a while, and he understood sometimes the staff don't get the credit or the recognition that they're due, and they do tremendous work.
It was never only about diversity for him. Yes, he was a proponent of diversity, but it was more than just diversity as well. It was really like access and equity.
And I heard that a group of students had taken over the dean's office. And I volunteered. I said, I'll go. And I said, yeah, but we're going to have to send a reporter too. And I said, fine, but I'll go. And what I did was I went and bought a few packs of cigarettes, some milk chocolates, stuffed that in my pocket, and away we went. And we knocked on the door. And lo and behold, they wouldn't let any of the reporters in but me. You see, I had done civil rights marches before I went to the newspaper, so I had a record. And I was one of the boys, and they let me in. They were so happy to see me with the cigarettes and the chocolates.
First thing you have to do is prepare yourself as well as you can. Not only in the pure academic sense, you got to have a good education nowadays. We live in a world where what you have in your head is more valuable than anything else, because that will determine what you do or what you can do with your life. But, and you can't help other people if you need help yourself. That's sort of obvious too. But in preparing yourself, you also want to try to open yourself up to as many new experiences, interactions with as many different kinds of people as possible. You want to learn as much as you can about who you are and where your history and culture, come from and what they are. But you also want to learn about other folks too. You can never really treat someone as an equal if you don't understand something about their history and culture, because otherwise you're just dealing in stereotypes.
A young man, or boys, would sit at the feet of older men and learn. But it was the other way around with myself and Blaine, because I was older than Blaine. And I sit at his feet. And I must say I learned a lot about myself, a lot about life in general.
Having that international experience of some kind, or having awareness of what other people on the planet were going through, were thinking, feeling, working towards, was a big part of what it meant to be a full human being.
As a professor, I had him as an undergrad because I was here at U of L, and I ended up minoring in Pan-African Studies. But I just remember him coming in and having his ritual, right? And so he would have his soda, and he would have his coat. He would take his coat off and lay it on the table and take out the comb and comb his hair over and, you know, kind of smooth everything down. He'd open this huge binder up, and then he would pace back and forth and just talk for however long the class was, whether it was an hour and a half, you know, hour and 15 minutes, or when we had a 3-hour class. He was talking, and he'd say, well, folks, I think it's time for a break. So he could go and get another soda, smoke a cigarette, and then come back. But I would just write feverishly because I was just amazed at how much he could recite, recall. And as I got to know him, you know, as a mentor, I learned that he had almost a photographic memory, you know, and that was part of his, you know, brilliance, was that, you know, he read a book a week. That was his philosophy, and he said he had done that since I think he was in high school. That was his thing, of making sure he read a book a week, this photographic memory. And he just came in, and I would get literally hand cramps writing, but there was never a person that I had encountered that I had learned so much from in such compact amount of time, that I just kept taking them, because, you know, it wasn't like one class repeated another. You just kind of build on everything.
He went through budget cut after budget cut after budget cut. He was able, we ended up at the end of his term with more faculty, more staff, more international programs, more diversity and community engagement, all of this at a time of shrinking budgets. And here's a guy who could have just gotten despondent. He could have responded in all sorts of ways. He kept positive. He kept calm.
He also worked with the college as Associate Dean for Faculty Personnel. And in that role, I think he had sort of made room, made space to get faculty and administrators to think very seriously and constructively about how we needed to change the dynamic in the classroom, in the offices, in the hallways, about race, about diversity. And he was very proactive about it. It wasn't a passive kind of thinking or action. He put plans into place. I believe that his diversity plan for the College of Arts and Sciences was the first full-out diversity plan that the university had, at least the first one that got published and put in place, and became a model for other plans in the rest of the college.
His impact on Pan-African Studies was profound, because you have to understand he was involved in the development of Pan-African Studies as an undergraduate. You know, even got kicked out of school for some protests that eventually led, among other things, to, you know, the creation of the department. So it was kind of his baby. And just like the city of Louisville that he loved so much, he was very dedicated to Pan-African Studies, dedicated to the development of faculty, dedicated to the development of a model that was different. I mean, we have a different model. A lot of Black Studies departments are overly reliant on historians and literature people. You know, Blaine was among the folk, and certainly there were others, Bob Douglas and people like that, Yvonne Jones, Susan Hurlin, but he was certainly integral in a model that is pretty innovative, and eventually rose to the chairmanship of Pan-African Studies and led us very effectively for a while and was always concerned with our well-being. So he was a cornerstone of this department.
As long as a person had potential, he was willing to tap into that. And he kind of saw advising as that point outside of the classroom where you could really tap into that person's potential, right, and guide their steps, you know, in this academic journey. And he wanted to put as much investment and have us spend as much time as we could developing that student. So he invested this in increasing the advising staff. So we have more than tripled, at this point, tripled the advising staff under his leadership.
Much of what happened at U of L in terms of the development of the Black Student Union in '68 grows out of the open housing movement in Louisville that really goes back to '66 and '67. This is the same time you've got the emergence of the Black Power movement, the Panther Party, other groups like that on a national basis, King's assassination. You know, all those things kind of blend in together. And I think it's important to keep that focus because we saw ourselves very much as being part of this national movement.
Well, in the Saturday Academy, for instance, there were people of all stripes. What I mean is there were people, unemployed people, there were working people, there were guys who, on the street guy people, there were all kinds of people. But I think he had that kind of mannerism that impressed everybody that heard him. Because as I say again, he never talked over your head, regardless of whether you was PhD or a no D, you know. He never talked over you. He made you understand what he was talking about and how important it was that he was giving this to you. And he wasn't giving it to you like it was a gift. He was sharing with you. That's different.
He wouldn't like to be singled out as this iconic, singular hero. He was heroic. He was extraordinary. He wasn't just ordinary in any sense. But he always was working with others on a lot of different sort of, you know, movements and mini movements, small groups of people to make change here on the campus and in Louisville using campus connections and resources. So he moved very easily between those worlds, right? And I think that, you know, he was a huge model for me as to what a scholar and a scholar activist should be.
Blaine was right there in charge, and he was so laid back, and it was the activist in him that made him want to do that. He knew he'd have to pay a price for it, and he did. That's all part of history. But he had to do something to change because they wanted a Pan-African Studies department, they wanted more African Americans on the faculty, and better efforts, outreach with the community and what have you, and he knew he had to do something. And so that just made it perfect for him. And he was an activist and did what he had to do, and it all came to pass because next thing you know, Blaine is the dean of Arts and Sciences. What a story, what a wonderful story to tell, you know. And to be able to have sat back and watched this happen, and never, ever was there a time where he beat on his chest and said, see what I've done.
We're also standing essentially in the area where Black Louisville was born. In the late 1820s, two young African Americans who had inherited a little bit of money were able to get a young white woman to actually sell them some property that was then on the outskirts of town. This is that property here going farther back up to about 7th Street. And of course, it's on this property that the free black community of Louisville took root.
And the more we worked with Blaine, the more fun it became because we knew that Blaine had a history of being especially interested in history of African Americans, and especially history of African Americans in Louisville and in Kentucky.
And Ann Braden said, you know, if we're going to be working on this issue, it happened to be affirmative action and people's misunderstandings of what that was about, she said it's really important for us to understand the history of that. And she said, and the person to do that for us is Blaine Hudson. And he, among us, it wasn't like, oh, now here comes the scholar to, you know, set us right. He was very much with us and supportive of what we were trying to do in terms of the community education. And to me, that expresses itself in a place like the Ann Braden Institute.
And Blaine and I and Ken also believe very strongly that once it's written down, it can't be destroyed or forgotten.
It's rare for a city to have the kind of resident historian that we had with him that brings, you know, the full wealth of their intellectual achievements, but also the real heart connection that he brought to this city and this campus.
And the one great thing was he saw the book complete. He saw the book as a #1 bestseller locally for months and months, and he saw the book sell out all of its first publication.
Well, Blaine wrote a lot, and he wrote in different venues, right? So he would do stuff, he'd do a monograph, but he'd also do stuff for the Filson Club. And that's impactful when you can go and move kind of, you know, easily between these different platforms, whether it's refereed publications and scholarly articles, or it's community stuff, which is reflected in local work like with Saturday Academy and others. So his research was really far-reaching. If Blaine had so chosen, you know, he certainly could have occupied, I guess, a more profound place on the national stage, but he knew who he was, right? And what he was a person who was very concerned about the city of Louisville in particular and the state of Kentucky.
One of the most important things I think that students can learn is that they can, in fact, make a difference, and that it's important for them to try, that they have a responsibility to make this the kind of society in which they could trade places with anybody, anywhere, and still feel that they could live a good life. And if you look at the society in a way where you know that's not true, then you know there's still work to be done. It's a real simple litmus test. And most of us know that there are an awful lot of people in this country right now that we would not want to trade places with. So that gives us an idea of just how much work we still have to do.
The biggest influence that Blaine had on me, again, going back, was his calm, was the demeanor that you, no matter what the issue is, no matter how big a crisis you might be facing, take a deep breath, look at it in context, think about what you're doing, don't take it personally, work your way through, call in smart people, talk to them about this, you know, rely on your staff. Blaine did that, and he did it very, very well, and he did it successfully.
He was just a terrific mentor. I know this is not a surprise to anybody. The longer he's been gone, the more I miss him, and the more I realize how much we all benefited from his presence here.
Blaine helped me understand how to keep things in perspective. You know, another dean told me when I became chair the first time, he said, you know, no matter what, don't let this job colonize your life. I think, you know, there's some things when I was younger I get upset about that I don't anymore, and that's not just the years. A lot of that is directly from Blaine Hudson. You know, we've sat down and he said, look, here's the end game here. Here's what this situation is really about. This over here, it's small potatoes and inconsequential. And so I'm able to see, you know, bigger pictures a little bit better and play the long game a whole lot better because of Blaine Hudson. Now, I'm not as calm as him all the time, but I'm a little more calm, I guess. But he was incredibly strategic, you know, and that's important. He was incredibly strategic professionally, and he was incredibly caring personally. So if I can get halfway to what he was, I think I'll be all right.
Dr. Hudson wouldn't just say yes or no. That's not the way he would answer a question. He painted a picture, and then it was left to you to interpret what that meant, which, you know, was actually flattering because he entrusted you. You know, he trusted you to take a vision or create a vision from his vision and go with it. I mean, it was a trust, it was a respect, and I think an opportunity to let other people truly grow, you know, into themselves.
He also had, I think, this very powerful but gentle authority. It came through in his voice, in his demeanor. So rather than things getting polarized in challenging conversations, he had a way of anchoring us, and anchoring us both with the stories of those who had gone before for whom it was challenging work, but also just in helping us believe that more was possible.
The phrase that comes to mind is remarkable calm. Blaine had a way of facing problems, anything from a crisis like a huge budget cut to a personnel issue, with context, contemplation, And again, remarkable calm.
And he lived that, you know, just meeting the person where they are, whether it's a student, whether it's a staff, whether it's a faculty, understanding where they are and push them to their, you know, next level.
Those of us who are still here must make sure that that voice is never silenced. And I think here on the university and across this city and across the state and across this country, we must make sure that we continue to hear what Blaine was saying and what he meant. I think it means a lot.
Now, it's one thing for somebody to define you or to give you an identity. It's something else for you to define what your identity is on your own.